Mr. President, I rise tonight to speak about an opportunity our country has to move this country forward. I appreciate the comments from my good friend from Michigan. I appreciate all the comments in this hallowed ground here called the United States Senate. But I have to say, while I agree on some points, I disagree on others. And what I'm really troubled by tonight, Mr. President, is the fact the other side is creating the ultimate shutdown in government right now. We've had an election. Our democracy has worked. We have a new person in the White House. We have a new direction for our country. And yet this person in the White House cannot even get his team approved here in the United States Senate. Today, after some 27 days, I think the number was for President Obama, he had 26 of his cabinet and other appointees already confirmed. At this point, President Trump has only 13 of his nominees. Quite frankly, had we not turned the Senate on 24/7 over the last few weeks, it would be until June or July of this year before we got the full slate of just the 15 cabinet officers confirmed. That's no way to run the federal government, and it indeed shows the hypocrisy of the other side. They complain about shut down this, shut down that. Well, what's happening right now in the United States Senate is that the other side is shutting down this administration from getting on with the people's business of what they elected them to do. Today, after 8 years of failed fiscal policies that have produced the weakest recovery in 70 years, the lowest GDP growth on a per capita basis in our history, a devastating time that left 4 million women in poverty after the last 8 years, and left many people struggling to get from payday to payday. After those 8 years, tonight, I'm actually very encouraged to finally be debating pro-growth tax ideas that can actually grow the economy and put people back to work. We now have an enormous moment of opportunity to change the direction of our country and unleash a new era of economic growth and prosperity for every American. President Trump has repeatedly said that job one is growing the economy. Personally, having worked in most parts of the world in my career, I see this so differently from Washington. My perspective is that of someone who has a global business perspective, not unlike that of our president. I know the way forward is not complicated. We absolutely can grow this economy. There are three things that this administration is already talking about to grow the economy. One is they've said we need to deal with this archaic and outdated and non-competitive tax structure that we have. Second, we need to push back on these arcane regulations that have sucked the very life out of our economy. And third, we need to unleash the God-given energy potential that we have in our country today. The bottom line is we have to create a more level playing field generated by trade negotiations to allow us to compete on a level playing field with the rest of the world. The first two pieces of these changes are changes to the tax code and rolling back the regulatory regime. Several ideas from both President Trump and Congress have surfaced in recent days to improve our tax code. Number one, lowering individual rates and cleaning up some of the deductions to simplify the individual code. Number two, lowering the corporate tax rate to become more competitive with the rest of the world, and cleaning up corporate welfare deductions that confuses the competition among players here at home. It creates winners and losers inadvertently. And number three, dealing with the archaic repatriation tax. We're the last country in the world that has this tax, and it penalizes our companies from competing abroad. These three components of changing the tax code will make us more competitive with the rest of the world, stimulate economic investment, and spawn a new era of economic innovation in America. These changes would help millions of Americans who've been crushed by this stagnant economy for much too long. I'm encouraged, Mr. President, that today there are so many of my colleagues in Congress interested in generating new pro-growth ideas. It's a new day in Washington. I've long been an advocate of simplifying the way we fund our federal government. In my opinion, the best way to do that is ideally with a new system like the fair tax, for example, which would move us to a totally new tax system and completely eliminate the personal, corporate, and payroll taxes we suffer through today. I think all of these ideas need to be considered, and none should be taken off the table arbitrarily. Having said that, one idea bears much scrutiny at this point in time, and that is the so-called border adjustment tax that's now being discussed in Congress. It would hammer consumers, shut down economic growth, and ultimately grow the size of government. In the last 16 years, under both a Republican and Democratic president, the federal government, the United States federal government, has grown from $2.4 trillion, Mr. President, in constant dollars, to today, last year, $3.8 trillion, some 60% growth in just two presidencies, one Republican and one Democrat. Similar tax schemes to the border adjustment tax in Europe grew the size of those governments in Europe by more than 60%. That's the last thing we need to be talking about right now after we've just experienced a similar type growth in our government over the last 16 years. Growing government with a new layer of complexity on top of our existing income tax system is the last thing we need to do to be doing at this point in time, when we should be talking about how do we downsize the federal government, make our system more competitive with the rest of the world, and create jobs and create the atmosphere for capital formation and innovation again. Historically, lawmakers have crammed numerous proposals into single, massive, overreaching bills. It's the Washington way. Those bills have often hurt the very people that they claim to champion. When bad ideas get mixed with good ideas, Mr. President, the bad ideas oftentimes become law. That's exactly what could happen here if changes to the individual code, the corporate rate, the repatriation tax, and this border adjustment tax are combined into one sweeping bill. This is exactly what Washington has historically done, and the results have been devastating. Each of these proposals could be considered independently and evaluated on their own merits. There's no reason why we can't do that. That's not possible today because many people here believe we're locked into the Washington scoring equation instead of looking at the real economic value long-term of any of these ideas. Many other countries, Mr. President, such as the United Kingdom, have faced these opportunities, made decisions, and acted accordingly without combining other extraneous ideas. And the results speak for themselves. Today, the United States is in the least competitive position it's been, I believe, in the last 100 years. In the last 70 years, America has enjoyed the greatest economic miracle in the history of mankind. It was developed on the back of innovation, capital formation, and the rule of law, combined with the best workforce in the history of the world. Those are four things that America possesses uniquely, in which many other countries are working hard to emulate. For too long, the strength of our economy has been held down by politicians here in Washington and their unintended consequences that occur when they try to interfere with the free enterprise system. It's time to trust that free enterprise system, to get this economy going again, change the rules to create a more competitive environment here at home that will allow us to compete overseas in a level playing field. It's time to simplify our individual tax code, reduce our corporate tax rates, eliminate conflicting business tax deductions, eliminate the repatriation tax so we can once again become competitive with the rest of the world. In recent decades, many other countries have made these changes and we're losing our competitive edge. Today, I'm encouraged to see both Congress and the White House working together on policies that will potentially grow our economy and bring relief to businesses and families who've been crushed by improper fiscal policies that are driven by political attempts to manage our economy. Now is exactly the time to get these changes right. We have an opportunity to change our tax code to a more competitive structure that doesn't pick winners and losers, that doesn't penalize people for success, and allows us to compete with the rest of the world on a level playing field. Mr. President, I like our chances if we can accomplish that. But let's don't confuse the issue with what may seem acceptable here in Washington, but is devastating back home to men and women who are trying to create jobs in their local economies. We need to free up capital. We need to make sure the rule of law supports the Constitution for every American. The American people deserve Congress treating these issues individually and independently to generate a simplified approach to funding our government and growing our economy. Mr. President, I hear the other side whine about they don't hear any proposals coming out of the White House. Well, Donald Trump's been talking about what he would do with the economy for the past 2 years. There's no mystery. He wants to grow the economy. Job one, he said, is growing the economy. And that doesn't mean for the rich. That means for the working men and women of America. I believe they have a plan. It includes adjusting our tax system, pushing back on unnecessary regulations that are sucking the very life out of our economy, and finally, once and for all, unleashing this great energy potential that we have. We already see moves today, as a matter of fact, on some of the regulatory fronts where we see the new Secretary of Health, HHS, issuing a new rule today. We see the new leaders that have been confirmed already taking action in this administration. I, for one, am anxious to move forward this debate. I applaud our compatriots in the House for bringing up these ideas. I look forward to an active and open conversation. But now's the time for the other side to begin confirming these nominees so that we can move forward with some of these ideas to get this economy growing. Mr. President, I know you also are aware that our military is in a devastating shape right now after 8 years of disinvestment and 15 years of war. Look, there's enough blame to go around here. This is not about the blame game. This is about getting this economic situation right where we can fund our military so we can defend our country. I'm very concerned that the other side is putting politics in the way of solving some of these problems that we have that are so devastating to men and women who are disenfranchised in our economy and our men and women in uniform around the world who we are putting in danger every day because we're not funding our military the way we should. Mr. President, the time for rhetoric is past. We are already past the tipping point of the most serious, I believe, fiscal crisis in our history. This debt crisis is very real. We don't need to grow the economy just to grow the economy. We've got to grow the economy because it's one of several steps that are absolutely mandatory to solving this debt crisis. And we will not and cannot solve our national security crisis unless and until we solve this debt crisis. Mr. President, I'm optimistic tonight because we're beginning to talk about these very issues. Thank you, and I yield my time, and I note